I expect this to take about an hour, and in the end, there will be time for an open question session, and I'll be just hanging around until everyone is pleased and happy with the answers. So a little bit about the agenda for today. I'm going to talk a little bit about why we're probably in this meeting and the background to Schrems and GDPR and all the privacy discussions. We're going to have a look at privacy and web analytics in general. And then maybe the big question is GA4, Google Analytics 4, really GDPR compliant. We're going to talk about Matomo in general, since it's probably the biggest option to use in Google products today on the market. I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can move and actually migrate your Google Analytics data into Matomo. And then a little bit about the Matomo Tag Manager, just a brief introduction of the process of getting up and running with a compliant, GDPR compliant Matomo Tag Manager setup. Will the recording be available afterwards? I hope so. If I'm not messing this up completely, we'll be able to share this video afterwards. Yeah, all right. So a little bit about me. I'm working as a business developer and a Matomo expert at the Matomo Expert Practice maybe since 2018. I've been working mainly with Matomo in my daily job. I also contribute to the Matomo community and to the Matomo Tag Manager as a project. So I actually have coded some features into the Matomo Tag Manager that are now available to everyone that uses Matomo. I also contribute to a research project about sustainable digitalization at the University of Skövde. And the outcome from that is today used in amongst the biggest one is probably the yearly conference, Sustainable Digitalization. Yeah, it's an important part of company culture, because at Digitalist, we strongly believe in open source in the society, most importantly in the public sector, but also the private sector. And if you're doing any kind of innovation, like our company innovates around Matomo, and using open source is not only because we want to control our data, it's also an enabler for our own innovation. And we've been doing this for 18 years now, contributing back to open source projects. So a small list of our Matomo clients that we've been working with since we started. Different things. A lot of them use our Matomo services. Others have bought consultants, work, etc. We also have partnerships with Matomo. So a lot of these companies, if you use them, you can get our Matomo SaaS service from them, or you can contact us directly, of course. A little bit about our service. We're building our own private cloud solution in Sweden, and it starts from 9,900 SEK. And yeah, we'll talk more about that, but this is a little bit about us and the sales pitch in the beginning. So let's talk about the content of the day instead. So a little bit about the background to why Schrems 1, 2, and I put a 3 question mark there, and we'll get back to why I did that soon. Well, I think it all started with what Edward Snowden shared with us in 2013, the massive violence that the American governments were applying to the world of internet as we know it today. So the massive violence, and there's a lot written about this, but I usually present this with 3 systems, because they're actually called that within the NSA. So the first one is upstream, which is basically eavesdropping of internet traffic. So NSA tags into routers and internet communication devices to basically listen to traffic, and what they're storing and so on has been shared in many ways. But this is one of the things. Any traffic that passes the US borders is very likely to be catched by NSA. And that's like URLs or browser information, etc., etc. We'll look into that soon. Another system is Prism, and Prism is basically data collection set up towards US cloud vendors. So companies like Google or Amazon or Microsoft actually have basically open backdoors into their systems that NSA can use. And then we have the system called Treasure Map, which is basically real-time information and metadata from all phone calls, but also other communication systems. There's been NSA staff talking about that they actually can listen into trigger words as bombs or president or something like that. I don't know how true that is. It's always a nice story to tell, but they do a lot of things with this. So this is basically the reason why people like Max Schrems started to investigate into this, because the US laws is an issue in regards to EU privacy. So is this really a problem? So the good thing here is that companies like Google, Microsoft, etc., they started to present the amount of times US authorities requests data from them, because the first three systems upstream, Prism and Treasure Map, are something that are out of their control, but sometimes they get public requests from authorities in the United States, and they have to respond with handing out data. So what we see here is the amount of user accounts at Google that has been leaked to US authorities. So during a 6 month period, and this is always like lagging one year, and this is public data. We don't know what they asked for. We just know that they share data with the authorities. So last year, July until December, almost 400,000 users' data were leaked. So is this an issue in Sweden? Well, at the same period, again, just for Google, 686 users were affected. And the interesting part here is that you might think that this might be the Swedish police going in and ask for data from Google, but that data does not show here. This is only requests coming from US authorities towards Google. And the interesting part here is like, okay, so what is 686 users? Well, it's user accounts affected. And this averaged to 4 times a day just in Sweden for Google. So this is a real problem. And we don't know what this is. This is just data picked out. And this is just one part of what NSA and public authorities in the United States are doing. And this is basically the background of why GDPR and these rules in the European Union are so important to us right now. It's questions about democracy and privacy. Understanding European privacy, we need to actually go back to the European Convention in the 1950s that was created after the World War to protect human rights and political freedom in Europe. This is actually what EU privacy laws refers back to in the modern world. Around 2000, there were safe harbor contracts between the United States and the European countries were introduced to handle data transfer between European companies and or European citizens and American companies. In 1995, the EU Data Protection Directive was created, and it's again about EU privacy and human rights laws. In 2015, 2 years after Edward Snowden leaked the NSA report, Schrems 1 was affected, and that actually invalidated the previous contracts we had to do US data transfer of personal data. So Safe Harbor was invalidated in 2015. 2016, Privacy Shield, the new arrangement to do third country transfers, were introduced in the European Union. 2018, we had GDPR with all of that. We probably all have heard a little bit too much about that, but that happened. Schrems 2 is the latest thing where Privacy Shield was invalidated. And in 2021, new standard contract clause handling US data transfer, amongst other things, were introduced. They're not in force, or they are in force now. And then in 2022, Joe Biden signed the executive order that should make it easy to do these data transfers. But what has been clear is that we're probably going to see a Schrems 3 based on the new SECs and the executive orders that President Biden signed together with the EU Commission. And why is that? Well, the comment that Max Schrems did in December was that it seems like the European Community just issues similar decisions over and over again in flagrant breach of our fundamental rights. So what is the real problem here? Well, basically they're saying that as long as you're not changing their American laws, and which allows for both surveillance of EU citizens, this will most likely not work. And they're also stating that we don't have a real court in place, and I'll explain a little bit about what that means. Basically, to do data transfers, you need to be able to have a court available for individuals so that they can get their rights tried in a court, and the court provided by the American state is not really a real court in this case. So that's what they're referring to. Most probably we'll see something coming out from Max Schrems within 1 or 2 years in regards to this, and it also refers a little bit to what the EU Commission decides to do as a next step, I would say. But basically they're saying none of your business is the organization that Max Schrems is, I think he founded it actually. They basically state that as long as you're not changing the laws, we're probably gonna see another Schrems. So looking at it at a bigger level, so as a Swedish citizen, and if I, for instance, visit my municipality online, we're all in the European Union. We're under the same laws, such as GDPR or OSL, the Swedish laws. And if I use, or if my municipality use a service vendor, and we write a contract between them, the municipality and the service vendor, we're all under the same law. So basically EU and the Swedish laws are above these agreements. They will always trump this. But if we use a service vendor like that installs Office 365 or Google Analytics or any other product, the agreements are with companies outside of the European Union. And what happens then is that other laws apply on top of companies like Microsoft or Google. And the law that is the biggest problem is the law called FISA 702. And FISA 702 is basically the law that gives American authorities the right to request data from American companies, no matter where the data centers are. So even if Microsoft open up a data center in Sweden, the FISA 702 law give NSA and other authorities the right to just get data without any questions asked from Microsoft. So this is the background and the problem more visualized. So as a next step, I'll talk a little bit about privacy and web analytics in general. So I did an example of visiting the site Apoteket in Sweden and what happens under the hood in my browser. So all the small triangles here visualize all the domains that are accessed when I visit the start page. And in this case, I turned on cookies in my browser. So this is what you'll see, and the requested third-party domains. So basically, they're doing 20 requests to third parties when I visit the start page and enable cookies. So what is this? Basically, the next step, what I did was looking at what domains were requested. And then I looked at the domains and the country of origin for those domains. So basically 11 domains, or basically it's 9 domains, were US based. If you want to do this on your own, you can actually follow the link you see in the bottom. I built a little script that you can basically run on your own sites, and you'll get the presentation afterwards. So you can see the link there. But basically, you can run this on your site and get an idea of what countries you are requesting from your site, or any site, basically. So what's the problem with this? Well, when you're doing a request, this is the hidden information that comes with a request to a third party. So if you're looking at the top here, we're basically just getting a font from Google. We're using a Google font on our site. On the other 3 squares, we can see the metadata that comes with these requests. So we have the language, for instance, we have the browser and device information, but we also have something called the referrer, basically the URL where the user were when you requested this domain. So in theory, this data can be used to start profiling user, and not only on your site, because Google font, the domain there, is used basically by millions of websites globally. So what they have in their logs is data that they can use to profile not only your users and their behavior, and they can do it on any site that you do that. So they can basically follow your clients between different websites and see exactly what they're doing. And this is what Google businesses are all about. I think Google revenue, I think 80% comes from selling ads. So this is why they're handing out free services globally, because they can profile your users on any site just based on that you're using services like Google Fonts. So another interesting part is that if you're using Matomo or Google Analytics, this is exactly the same data that those services are using to profile users and behaviors. So it's basically the same type of information. So when it comes to GDPR and rights for individuals, we have the right to restrict processing, and we have the right to object being profiled. And then we have a lot of rights around the automated decision making, such as advertising, for instance. And to do profiling, we need to collect a consent. So we look a little bit into what profiling is. So if I visit a website, normally we set something like a cookie or another identifier. And then we send data to Matomo or Google Analytics or any other system. It can just be the Google Fonts site and the user that catches the font there. The second visit or third or whatever, we can detect this visitor based on the cookie information or any other identifier that we store. And then we can start building a user profile in the system. You don't need cookies to do this. You can do this purely on the server side and to do this, you basically need a consent in GDPR. So this is what a lot of people are missing. It's not about setting cookies, it's about doing profiling as well. So then we have the personal data version, and the simple things that we all know about is the IP addresses, the email addresses, and so on. This is known and simple facts. The more complex version is that personal data is also data that in combination with other data can identify an individual. And then to make it even more complex, we have things like sensitive personal data. And when you handle that type of data, you have to be extra careful, and it's very questionable if you should use third countries to services to do that. So I usually do an example of when anonymous data is no longer anonymous. And to do this, I usually look at the village called Lomträsk in Sweden, where we have 55 inhabitants, according to Wikipedia. So if you're using a web analytics software, you're starting to collect a lot of simple metadata in your web analytics. Things like the location Lomträsk that you can get from the IP address. If you can combine that with, for instance, your profession, we're starting to get close to using public data and your web analytics data to find an individual. We could also use the browser language, and perhaps we know that the individual is female, and we're getting very close to getting personal data in our system, just based on these three seemingly anonymous information objects. We can look at age. We can see that someone is probably a homosexual, or they have a very unusual phone brand. That's something that we might even be able to find out when we're visiting or looking at the images from people in that area. So what we also need to know is that if you're using web analytics, you're usually collecting not only these three simple metadata. We're collecting hundreds of unique metadata per request or per user. And with machine learning, it's a very, very simple task to start doing this mapping. Not necessarily mapping out who the individual is, but doing the profiling is what companies like Google for sure do in the background. So when you're doing third country, or when you're processing personal data, which I think we need to look at our web analytics as personal data, basically. And then, according to the GDPR, we have the data controller, basically the company that has the website, and then the data flow processor, the part that get data from the data controller. And it's pretty clear that in GDPR, we need to be really, really clear what we're doing in this relation. And we need to have a data processor agreement in place when we're doing this. So basically, and then we have the details about the transfers of data for a country outside of the EU. And this is what none of your business, the company or the organization that Max Schrems is part of. Basically, it says that you have to be able to process a complaint examined by a court. And also, if you're handling sensitive data, it has to be protected more than other types of data. What this is hasn't really been cleared, and there's been discussions about encrypting data and storing it in other systems and so on to be able to store sensitive data. This will never be possible to do with Google Analytics. So encryption is not really a solution. So based on this, is GA4 GDPR compliant? The thing is that they have done major improvements in relation to privacy, but it's really not in Google's control, since everything relates back to the laws in the United States and what the European Union and United States can come up with in terms of agreements. But no, it's super clear that they're doing a lot to make Google Analytics for a more privacy friendly alternative. So deletion of data is better, data retention, they have introduced a new privacy policy, etc., etc. You can read all about this. And the Google consent mode is another feature that you can use to basically hinder Google to get data before you have consents in place. You still need to have your own consent platform in place, but Google Tag Manager and Google Analytics will basically be able to read or make actions based on the consents you collected. So this is all good. But in short, I would say that the answer is no. If it's GDPR compliant, Google Analytics still collects a lot of personal data, unique user identifiers, etc., etc., and it processes the data outside of the EU. So in theory, you can probably use it, but they're also still relying on standard contract clauses, and these are in debate whether they will be functional or not. And since they are using, since it's an American cloud provider, they're still under the US data surveillance laws, such as Visa and Cloud Act. So, I mean, the basic problems are still there. So it comes down to what type of data you're collecting. So also, it's pretty, this is what Google says basically. You must obtain a legally valid consent to use cookies, and yeah, we all know this, but this is what Google is stating. They're not really stating that they are a data processor. They're more stating what you need to do to use Google Analytics. And yes, the standard contract clause framework is still in progress. You will probably be able to use Google Analytics, but it will require you to be super strict, and you will probably lose a lot of data. GDPR also states that you can't really share data with other systems. So you can't really integrate Google Analytics with another system, like Google Ads, for instance, without having a consent to do so. And I would say it's quite questionable if you are allowed to do that, or if you're allowed to let another company do that. It's one thing if your company do it, but Google will use that information for their services, and there I would say it's much more questionable if you should do so or not. Yeah, exactly. So these heavily sharing between other systems and Google Analytics that we've been used to is something we should really limit in the future. And if you're using sensitive data, I think it's really out of the question that you should use services like Google. And like sensitive data, this is not only sending sensitive data to Google Analytics, like in a forum or as a dimension or anything like this. It's enough that the title of the page is about something like this, or because you will start sending snippets of data about these users that in the end can become very sensitive. So I did a little flowchart or decision diagram about whether you can or cannot use Google Analytics. So first of all, we need to understand if the SCCs are valid. If not, Google Analytics 4 is not really an option for us. Is there a risk of sharing sensitive data? Like, do you handle sensitive data on the site? Well, if you do, I wouldn't say that Google Analytics 4 is an option. Third step would be, do you have a 100% blocking consent system in place? So 100% blocking means that you're not collecting any data until you have a consent from the user. So if not, well, you shouldn't use Google Analytics 4. And if you have, are you okay with losing data? Because you will lose data because a lot of users do not press yes on your consent questions. So if you're okay with that, you'll probably be able to use Google Analytics 4. So this is basically what I think are the most important questions to ask. What I also think you should do is to ask a question within your organization. So basically, the first question is, what can we do? Basically, is it legal for us to do this? The second question is, what should we do? And that's more like connected to the values or whatever. Is it appropriate? Is this what we want to do with the users or our clients? What's the promise we want to make to them? What does our branding say? So for me, it's pretty clear, and the trends in Sweden and all over Europe are that public authorities has been moving away from Google Analytics for the last years. I don't know if anyone I talk to will stick to the Google platform in that world. We're also seeing lots of private companies moving away because of several reasons. But I would say that this discussion here, it's a little bit about values and what we want to stand for in the end. Do we want to continue to basically sell our users to companies like Google? Is one of the drivers. The other one is, of course, the legal part and the fines that's been starting to be handed out. But I usually use the term, we need to be more ethical in our marketing or our digital marketing. So that means, as an organization, we had to stop setting pixels for platforms like LinkedIn and Google or Facebook. There are huge fines coming up in relation to Facebook. I think it was declared 3 days ago, actually, because they were basically fetching data without user consents to Facebook pixels. And this really has to stop. So what we need to do instead is to start using campaign tagging as we used to do, but not share data with third-party players, particularly players with outside of the European Union. All right, so my message is clear. You should definitely leave the Google suit if you will do. It's up to you, but the best alternative we know today is, of course, switching to Matomo, and now we'll talk a little bit about that. Yes, Alexander, my colleague, is writing a little bit about there is a risk that Google Analytics 4 that collect personal data, but it's not visible in the GA4 reports. Yes, there are a lot of practical examples. We've been, as a company, we actually help our clients using Google products still. Not everyone has moved. So we've been working with Google Analytics and Google Analytics for some time now. And yes, Google Analytics 4 is a new product. It's something you need to relearn. It's kind of frustrating for a lot of users to move into a new type of system. I personally think Google Analytics 4 is a modern product that introduces a lot of new thinking into web analytics that are in general pretty good, but it's definitely a learning curve, and what Alexander also mentions here is that we see a big risk of data being collected that is not really visible to us in the Google Analytics interface, since you have to set up custom reports to really detect it. So again, we point to Matomo as the great solution, of course. So a little bit about Matomo. It was actually created at Amazon to replace Google Analytics, and they didn't want to share the advertising data with Google, of course, or they didn't want Google to profile their sales. So this was how and when Matomo was created. It was called P-Week at the time, and it was created as an open source system. And some important facts about Matomo: it's very similar to Google Analytics or Universal Analytics, as we are used to, and it was created to replace that. So you will recognize the figures and the wordings in the system. It enables us to have full data ownership, and this is of course the main driver behind using a system like Matomo. It's also 100% open source, meaning we can contribute to the product, like that's what we as a company do. We can improve it over time. There are great tools for GDPR. GDPR has been the major driver for the move to Matomo in the world globally, I would say. So there are even menus in Matomo that will help you comply with GDPR, and lots of great documentation available. Matomo is also a system that is based on plugins. So you can basically build your own analytics tools based on the needs in your organization. So there are plugins that allows you to do heat maps and session recordings, and there are lots of different tools you can build into your Matomo service. Some of them are not open source. They are premium ones that you need to pay for. Most of them are open source, so you can really adopt Matomo to your organization. Some examples from the interface. I just wanted to show you that most of the wordings, like in Matomo, for instance, we talk about visits. Visits are sessions in Google Analytics. Then we have page views, searches, downloads, outlinks, etc., etc. The interface, you can also see URLs like this. We talk about page views, unique page views, bounce rate, everything is very similar to what we're used to. We also have informations about marketing campaigns, so we can basically see what campaigns that generated more conversions, etc., etc. So the question was, to what extent is Matomo still affiliated with Amazon? Well, not at all. The product is owned, or actually it's an open source project. The brand name Matomo is owned by an individual that is also part of the community. But otherwise from that is open source. We can basically, it's super transparent. You can go to their GitHub page and join the community, and you can download it and copy it and extend it in any way you want. So it's has nothing to do with Amazon anymore. It was just part of what he did at the time at Amazon, but he still made an open source project of it. Another thing we need to understand is that Matomo is a system. Yeah, well, the question is campaign acquisition data from Google Ads. I'll actually talk a little bit about that soon. But what I wanted to point out first is Matomo is a system. So normally if you use Google Analytics, that's a SaaS service. You don't have to bother. You just create an account, set up a site, and you're good to go. With Matomo, you need to understand that this is a system. So you need to host it properly. And let me point this out very clear. This is not something your IT department will be good at. The list of companies I've helped where they started with their own IT department and failed with Matomo, not because it's hard to set it up, That's anyone can do that. The problem is that you need skills towards Matomo to set it up properly. Matomo is, you have hundreds of configurations you need to understand, and particularly if you have a large installation with lots of data or lots of sites. The same goes for your web analytics partner. I've also seen companies setting up Matomo for their clients, and those are actually even worse because usually we don't have any security updates being done for several years, etc., etc. So please handle Matomo as a business critical system, and it needs to be taken care of properly. There are cloud providers out there. We are one of them. Make sure to do this in the correct way. Your data needs it. Yeah, you need to configure Matomo to be GDPR compliant, because you can basically set up Matomo to be as intrusive or even more intrusive than Google Analytics. It's up to you. You will need some premium plugins. The one that we always talk about is custom report. It's basically something you need to install in Matomo to do. It's pretty similar to the custom reports in Google Analytics. Actually, it's basically combining custom dimensions and metrics and filter out that data. So you probably need that to do more advanced analytics. Yes, Anton shared a link that there are great guides for Matomo available online. Yeah, exactly. There are really a lot of great content on matomo.org that you can use and learn, and there are forums, and I personally enjoy the GitHub forum as well, because if you're more technical as an individual, you're usually finding answers to all your questions. On another point I would really want to state is that please do not use Windows as a hosting system if you're going to host Matomo on your own. Not because it's not working, but just because you will not get any help from the community. No one else is using Windows, or very few, and that means worse testing, etc., etc. Also, taking care of the system is not a project. It's not something you install and forget. You need to run updates on these systems every week and potentially every night to keep them secure and performant. Of course, we can help you with that. So give us a shout if you want help. Okay, let's talk about importing analytics data into Matomo. So you can more or less import the same data, because the data models are very much like each other. Sessions are called visitors or visits, as I said before. So you can import most of this data. So what cannot be imported? Well, raw data or visitor logs will never be imported. Everything that will be imported is aggregated data. So basically your daily reports of page views, etc., etc. There are also some limitations in terms of metrics that are not the same, and of course, then it will not work. So one example is, and in this case, it's not really that unique visitors is definitely a metric that exists in Matomo, but the way an export works is that you will get this data per day. So if you're looking at a week, the unique visitors calculation is not possible to do. You would need to do an export per week and per year and per month to get that correctly from Google Analytics, and it's not possible to do that right now, at least. You will not get things like search keywords with no result. Those things work differently. Funnel reports, e-commerce conversion rates work differently. Exit and entrance rates are calculated different in Matomo, etc. You can read about limitations here. So the process of doing this is basically that you need to set up an OAuth client configuration, and this is something you do at Google. And then you need to authorize your Matomo instance or installation towards the Google API. And then you can basically run imports towards Google Analytics. There is a graphical user interface for this. And when you do an import, a new website in Matomo is similar to a site or a property in Google Analytics. So it's basically an instance of the website. So when you do an import, that would be great. And that means that if you want to add your Matomo data together with the Google Analytics data, you have to wait for the import to be done, and then you can add your Matomo tracking on top of that. And you should use the Matomo Tag Manager for this. Just an example of the interface. So for the imports, so you can do this in the graphical user interface, or you can do it on the service. But basically, you set the dates, you point out the property, the account ID, and the view that you want to use. You can also do some custom mapping of dimensions, like in Google, for instance, you have the demographics. So you could theoretically map things to a visit dimension in Matomo, and then just start importing, and usually it works well. Depending on the volumes of data, it can be pretty quick for a small site, but it can take days for larger sites. And this is because of the limitations in the API and the network protocol. It's a lot of data that should be imported, basically. One other thing we noticed is if your site has a lot of URLs, normally the default, I think the default setting for Matomo, if you install it out of the box, is that it allows to have 500 unique URLs per day. But there is a setting for this, so you need to be aware that you need to be aware that you need to optimize this in relation to how many unique URLs you're having. So another question in the chat, we still need an opt-in from the users to track their visits on a site through Matomo, right? Well, no, actually, I'll soon talk about that as well. There are actually openings to track users before you have the consent. I'll talk about that soon. Yeah, when you're doing imports of large installations, you might want to look into the guides and the Google Analytics importer plugin and the GitHub repository to find information on specific questions. So on regards to that, the tracking without a consent, we can use Google Tag or Matomo Tag Manager to do this. Matomo Tag Manager is basically built in with the same concepts as Google Tag Manager. We have tags, triggers, and variables. Tags is code that is executed. Triggers are the events that decides when to run the code, and variables are basically dynamic values that we can fetch from the site or that we can create on our own in different ways. Very similar to Google Analytics. What differs is that in Google Analytics tag or Google Tag Manager, I mean, you have a lot of predefined tags from different companies. In Matomo, the amount of predefined tags is not that big. However, these tags are just code. So with some skill sets, it's really not complicated to add the similar functionality in Matomo. Just need to do it a little bit more old school. Some important features, of course, you can publish and you can preview and debug your Tag Manager instance towards your site. And there are options to extend with your own plugins. So you can install plugins to Matomo, for instance, to give users your custom tags. And this is something that we at Digitalist do. We're building plugins to extend Matomo. So we're planning to build plugins for consent management platforms and so on. We're also building some helper tags that to make tracking more easy, that will be available in our SaaS services in the coming months. So it's definitely possible to extend Matomo in many ways. Okay, let's go forward. All right, so regarding the questions, can we use Matomo without having a consent? Yes, I would say, but first of all, to make it compliant, use an EU-controlled hosting solution. And what I mean by that is that it should be a European company owning the hosting environment. So Amazon or Azure or any American SaaS provider is not an option. Use an EU-controlled hosting solution. Configure Matomo to meet GDPR. There are lots of guides for this. Someone, Anton, wrote here that you can use matomo.org/guides, and there are a lot of guides around this. And even in the interface, it can help to follow GDPR and the default settings for a lot of things, like for data retention or IP anonymization, etc., are defaults to what GDPR states that they should be. So those things are pretty simple and straightforward. In the tag manager, because this is important, you can default Matomo tag manager or Matomo basically to run without cookies. And if you do so, what happens is that you're basically saying to Matomo that every time a user visits your site, it will be treated as a new visitor. And by doing so, there are rooms and openings in GDPR to do tracking. There's still debates on whether how you can do this or not, but even public organizations or authorities in Europe has been applying this technique quite a lot, and it's been in different data protection authorities in Europe has actually approved this. I haven't seen anything like this in Sweden yet that they've talked specifically about it, but a lot of the authorities in Sweden has applied this model. So you're running Matomo without setting cookies. And the drawback of that is that every visit, you will basically create a new visitor. So the figures for returning visitors will be something you can't look into. You can't really look into, like, did someone convert on the third visit? Those numbers will be skewed. But what you're actually doing is that you sync Matomo with your consent management platform. So as soon as you get a consent, you can actually set the cookies, and then you can start getting figures like returning visitors and so on. So, but it's great because we're actually, if you're looking at most of the data like conversions, page views, etc., you can actually do that without setting the cookie. And the reason for it is that we are not doing profiling, and profiling was one of the reasons for us to get a consent in GDPR. Basically, cookies and profiling are the reasons why we can skip having the consent, or at least this is what a lot of organizations has adopted so far. We might see more clear guides towards this, but right now this is the possibility that is. I will also state that learning Matomo, and this goes to your development team, to your staff, etc., because a lot of the GDPR compliance is about what and how we use the product. What type of data are we actually sending in? Matomo has great tools that you can use to find personal data, and you can even anonymize data that you previously collected, and you can also delete and export data that you find in Matomo, in the Matomo interface. At Digitalist, we're even building a monitoring service that so that our clients will get alarms if we detect personal data in the Matomo instance, so we can be really quick to filter out and act on that. But if there are tools for anyone that uses Matomo to search and delete data, at least. All right. I think one question that I got that I didn't really answer was, is the campaign acquisition data from Google Ads available in Matomo? Well, there is a plugin for that. So what you don't want to do is you don't want to set pixels in Matomo to send data back to Google Ads or not in Matomo on your site, because if you do so, you really need a consent, and that data will probably be skewed, and it's not really good practice from a privacy perspective to set these tracking pixels. So what you can do instead is that with this plugin, you can actually import data from Google Ads into Matomo. So you can actually get reports in Matomo based on the Google Ads. So there are possibilities. I would also like to talk about some upcoming events. We will be at Kista and the Swedish conference Lösningar for Offentlig Sektor, 25th and 26th of January. If you come to our booth there, we have some nice surprises for you, and we also will do free scannings of your site and help you get an idea if you're meeting GDPR or not, and get some advice on how to become compliant. We also have some trainings available right now. So we have an introduction training to Matomo the 16th of February, and the 1st of March, we're doing an advanced training, and all of these are online events. We're also introducing a partner program. So we understand that a lot of companies do not be able to run Matomo on their own. So therefore, we're already having a few partners, and what we will supply is that we basically be the second line support for Matomo. We will give them free training in Matomo, and we have more partner deals. Get in contact if you're interested in that. The trainings will probably be in Swedish this time, but let's talk about that. Send me a mail, Stella, if you want to discuss it. We can probably set it up in English as well. The plan was Swedish, but let's talk about it. What else? Yeah, I can point out that our SaaS is great and we have great clients. So the last slide is sales. Now I'm open for questions because we're running out of time. And thank you if you need to leave for listening in. I hope this helped you. But just shout out or write in the chat if you want to ask me more questions. Is it possible to import GTM setup in Matomo? No, it's not possible to import it directly. There are some guides though that will guide you into doing so, but no direct import. I know people have been looking into that, but I haven't seen anything that is ready. One thing that I can mention that we are doing at Digitalist is that we are building a user survey tool within Matomo. So you can basically build questionnaires and surveys within Matomo and deploy them through the Matomo tag manager and get the form data within Matomo, which is a really nice thing. Yeah, the other questions that is, yes, it's recorded, and I hopefully we'll be able to share it and look into that. Okay, more questions. All right. Seems like we need to get more coffee and get some more job done. I'll say thank you, and I hope you enjoyed it. Please contact me if you want to. You can just send a mail to matomo@digitalist.se and we'll look into it. And if you are a web agency or whatever, please contact me. We can discuss the partnership deals and what we can do for you there. Hi, Olof. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for the feedback, guys. And thank you for the questions.